Unleash your potential. The Empowerment Zone. Hello and welcome to the Unleash Your Potential segment of the Zarlequan Indy-Verse. I'm your host, Brittani Starr, and today we have a fantastic guest joining us, Alyssa Zander. She's not just an author, but a codependency and relationship coach, guiding women on a path to healing, empowerment, and self-discovery. Her book, Healing the Mother Wound with Mother Nature, is a poetic journey through life's darkest moments and an exploration of self and soul. Now let's dive into Alyssa's world and her wisdom. The Zarlequan Indy-Verse. Welcome to the show, Alyssa Zander.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and honestly a privilege to be here and just chat with you today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, your work focuses on healing codependency and relationships. Could you tell us what led you down this path and why is it so important for you?
Yeah, so what led me down this path was really just my own, I'll just name it. My Saturn's return kind of like threw me and spit me out and really brought up all of my own codependency patterns that I was completely unaware of. So I would say like around 30, like all my relationships just kind of imploded on themselves, and I was really invited to look more curiously at where I was a part of the dysfunction that was happening in my relationships with my family and my relationships with romantic relationships and my friendships. So it was this like really internal time in my life where I started seeing myself more intimately in that way. And then that kind of just led into sharing it with the world in a myriad of different ways.
Wow. So you wrote this book of poetry, but it was written during your darkest period. How does this inspire women now to not be codependent?
Mhm. Yeah, so a lot of the poems that are in the book were ways that I was processing. I went through a very traumatic childhood where I experienced abuse, and even then when I was a teenager, I used writing as a form of just healing and just being able to see myself because I felt so alone and isolated in my experience. And so that kind of stayed with me throughout my life. And I used this book, like, well, actually, it dropped in, like, it just dropped in for me. Like, you're meant to compile all of this, what I thought was like, no one wants to look at that. Like, that is no one should see that. But really, what I've noticed in my work with women and as a codependency and relationship coach, the more I share my story, the more I share how I've processed and what I've moved through, the more women feel seen and heard in their experience. And then I was like, whoa, that is healing the mother wound, because the mother wound says we have to do everything alone. We're comparing ourselves to others. There's a lot of judgment that we hold for ourselves, and quite frankly, like unconsciously kind of hold for others. And so by sharing our stories, by putting my deepest, darkest, moments in book form, I am healing the mother wound within me that says that I have to do it alone, because I don't have to do it alone, that we're actually healing together. The more I share the pain and the joy, the more others get to have that permission to do the same.
Beautiful. So poetry can be deeply personal and vulnerable, as you have shown. How did you find the courage to share this with the world?
Still looking for it. Like, it's so interesting because I can sit in a room full of women and lead them through a guided practice and a guided meditation, and my voice will not shake. I feel very like grounded and rooted. But when you put me on a stage to like share poems from this book, I immediately like my voice shakes, my body is shaking. It's like it is so vulnerable, and it actually has been really challenging to do it anyways. how I move through that is reminding myself of my why. Like, why did I even compile these poems? Why did I find a publisher? Why did I do all of that? And it's because my soul's mission is to heal the mother wound. And so when I remember my why of bringing awareness to the mother wound for the collective, I remember that it's not about me, right? Like, it's not about me. It's not about, the fears that I have. It's about something like a greater mission. And then I anchor into that. Like, this is for the woman who is alone in this, who feels alone in this. It's for the child or the daughter who experienced the same thing that I experienced, but doesn't know that anyone else is. Like, it's for them. And when it's for them, I can kind of get out of my own like egoic, like, it's not safe to do this state of mind.
What is the first step? Like, how does someone recognize that they are being codependent? And once they recognize that, what's the next step after that? What do we do?
Yeah, so I reflect back to my own personal journey, and there's like three main archetypes that I kind of have seen myself personally navigate. That first one is like the student, which you just kind of named, like, okay, what's that first step? It's creating awareness. It's that learning period where you're gathering information. So what I would say is start diving into what codependent patterns even are, what they look like, how they show up in your life. And I think that there's a huge need to rewrite how we relate to the word even codependency, because we see it as just a substance abuse term, which it absolutely can be and is, but it's so much more than that. Codependency is when we place our worth or our good feelings about ourselves on something or someone outside of ourselves. So that can be your job or your relationship and it meaning something about you. It can be the car you drive, the home you live in, and how you're making it mean something about you. Society has truly primed us to be codependent on materials. And so we begin to liberate ourselves when we say, okay, I'm willing to see where this is playing out in my life so that I can, because in that awareness, then I get to take radical personal responsibility for my life. So I would say if you're in that, I call it the student, when you're the student, start just bringing curiosity, learn about it like you've learned, like learning something new for the first time, not with judgment, even though that comes in very loudly for people who experience codependency. Instead of the judgment, can you allow for grace? Because there's a very wise part of you that created that codependent pattern, and it was to keep you safe at a point in time. Now, as adults, it's not keeping us safe anymore. It's actually keeping us more isolated and in separation. So I would say be a student, be curious. What is codependency? What does that look like? What are some patterns? And then find a group to support you. It's why I created the membership, because I needed it. I needed a group of women who would come together so we could talk about our dysfunctional patterns with levity, like some place to be held accountable and to receive continuous support. It's super helpful.
Now, some degree of codependency, because we are all one human race and we kind of depend on each other, is not only acceptable but healthy. Finding that line, and that's where you come in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wild and beautiful to be on the other end of codependency and have like interdependence, because like you said, we do heal when we come together. We do heal when we allow ourselves to receive support. It's when you're making that support and that person or that thing outside of you means something about your value or your worth. So the freedom that I get to experience, will use friendships. when I get to connect with a new friend, and then for some reason that friend just it doesn't align or resonate anymore, we get to release them without this attachment of like, no, if you're my friend, you need to be that person for me forever and always, or it means something bad about me. Instead, we start living in this symbiotic relationship where people get to come together at beautiful, opportune moments and then fall apart when they're in it's a dance. We start dancing with life and with relationships instead of grasping on for this like false sense of ownership in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's really deep.
Yeah.
What new projects do you have on the horizon? What can we look forward from you?
Yeah, I pour into my offers called Codependency Alchemy. I have a podcast for those students, like where do you start? The podcast I have is a great, entry point. It's like, okay, let me just start hearing about these patterns and hearing the stories so I can begin to weave and relate it to my own. And then I have a membership also, Codependency Alchemy, the membership, where I support women in answering questions every week. Every week they get to come in and say like, okay, my partner did this and this is how I reacted and like help. And I'll go into our private broadcast on Telegram and I'll leave voice notes with guidance, with support, with shadow work questions to move through, prompts. Um, and we do that on a weekly basis and meet once a month on Zoom as well, just to collectively come together and just be held in the space. And then I have a mastermind, which is a much more intimate group of women. It's less than 6 women, and I only open that 2 times a year because we are doing the deep work, and that takes time and it takes commitment and devotion. And that's kind of ongoing. People who want to stay in the mastermind have stayed, continuing on because they really love to have that space to just be like, okay, I need that sisterhood. I need that community. I need that support when I'm arguing with my partner or when my child is mirroring to me some of my stuff. It's just so nice to have a place to vomit it all out, women don't have that, didn't really have that. Generations before us, they didn't really have those spaces to just be held. And so that's just what I've created because I see the women in my life, how much they didn't have that and how much they had to do on their own. And so I've created the membership and the mastermind to hold us, to hold me in it as well.
I want to thank you for creating that space for women, because you're right. I think it has been severely lacking.
Yeah.
Women do take on so much and say nothing. We do it with a smile while we're falling apart. Our leg is behind us dragging, and we just keep going and go, well, nobody else is going to. So I am really grateful that you created this beautiful community for us to hold each other.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I truly believe that we get to live radically different where we don't have to keep that smile on the face while we hold our child and vacuum the floor and pick up the groceries all at the same time. Like the more that I've leaned into healing my codependency, the more I see that my partner, he wants to do the vacuuming. Like he wants to order the groceries. Like our partners want to be helpful. And when we learn how to communicate and live in this symbiotic relationship with one another where needs are articulated without blame or judgment or shame or guilt even, you start building this like it's beautiful what can happen. I've been with the same partner for 10 years, but we've had a break, and my relationship, the first half of our relationship to this half, 1000% different. And I think it really is all because of the healing of codependency. And it's an ongoing journey. It's not like I'm healed and it's like gone forever. It still comes up from time to time, but you really begin to see how it's not the person necessarily in the relationship. It's just the dynamic that you're creating with them.
Oh, personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
love that you just expressed that, how you're in the same relationship with the same person, but it's drastically different because of you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
powerful because I think a lot of people think they have to, well, I have to leave him. He's
Mhm.
terrible. He won't do things. And that's a beautiful testimony. I love it.
Mhm.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All of Alyssa's links will be in the description box. So go ahead and click there, her book and her website, so you can go be a part of this beautiful community that she has created. I am your host, Brittani Starr. Come back next week for some more engaging conversations.